Hi, my friends. The Thanksgiving holiday is coming up, and I want to encourage you to talk to your children, to your students, to any kid that you love about Thanksgiving in a way that is honest and that acknowledges different perspectives and that doesn't perpetuate stereotypes. And so what I'd like to do is share with you one way that you can honestly explain Thanksgiving to kids. First, you want to be sure to approach the conversation with an understanding that the true story of Thanksgiving is so much more than just one story. All of the events leading up to the gathering that has come to be known as Thanksgiving, and all of the events that happened afterwards, are all crucial pieces of the story. So you could start this conversation by saying, the Thanksgiving holiday is coming up, and I've realized that in all the years that we've celebrated it, we've never really talked about it and where this holiday comes from. What do you know about the story of Thanksgiving? And so starting with a question like this can give you a sense of what they already know. It can help you understand if there are any myths or stereotypes that they may have, and will help you just meet them where they're at. Then you could say, the story of Thanksgiving that is usually told tells only one perspective or is only one side of the story. And it's important for me that you understand the whole story. And even though Thanksgiving is a holiday that can be full of celebrations and delicious food and friends and family, the whole story about where Thanksgiving comes from is very long and pretty sad. And so I'm going to share the story with you. And I want you to know that if you have any questions, you can always stop me and ask. And then you could start by saying, a long, long time ago, hundreds of years ago, people from Europe took ships and they went all over the world to discover new lands and new places to call home. And one place that they landed was America. And something that you may have heard is that people from Europe discovered America. But there were already so many communities of Native American people living beautiful lives there. And you can't discover someplace if there are already people there when you arrive. And so even though the land already belonged to people, the Europeans, they still wanted to take this land for themselves. And so they did. And they decided to settle on the land. And one day, there was a meal shared between a big group of Wampanoag people, which is a community of Native Americans, and a group of these settlers that called themselves Pilgrims. And this meal is where Thanksgiving comes from. And what happened next was that hundreds of years later, a person with peach skin wrote a story about this gathering that the Wampanoag people and the settlers had. And in this story was the first time that this meal was described as Thanksgiving. And at first, the story wasn't really even a big deal. No one really talked about it. But then people started to use this story as proof that it was okay for European settlers to take land from the Native Americans. And it actually wasn't okay. What started to happen was that people with peach skin began to use this story to say, look, the Native Americans gave us this land and it was such a peaceful exchange that we had a big feast to celebrate. But that's not what really happened. The whole story of Thanksgiving is more than just this one meal. It's a story of years and years of broken promises and stolen resources and fighting and heartbreak and people getting sick and hurt and killed. The story most people know only tells a tiny piece of a really big story. And the story that most people have heard leaves out the perspective of the Native Americans. How the settlers treated the Native American people before and after this one meal is so important, because the story of Thanksgiving was created to make it look like everything was okay when it wasn't. The story that is usually told makes it seem like the Wampanoag people gave their land happily, and it was actually stolen. The stories that have been told make it seem like the settlers and the Wampanoag people got along beautifully, but what actually happened was that the settlers hurt and killed so many Wampanoag people and other Native American communities. And you know what? The Wampanoag people were so strong, and they fought back, and they did everything that they could to protect their people and to protect their land and the animals. But the settlers, they had more powerful weapons. And they took their land, and they took their knowledge and their ideas. They took their things, and they did this for a very, very long time before this one meal and this one gathering happened. So we can't really understand Thanksgiving without understanding all that the Wampanoag people and other Native Americans communities experienced. And this one nice meal and this one big gathering doesn't paint a true picture of what the relationship between the Native Americans and the people that stole their land was really like. It's not fair to only look at one small moment and use it as an example of a long and unkind relationship. It would be like if someone suddenly came into your home and started being really mean to your whole family, and they took your things and they hurt the people that you loved, and they said that everything that was in your home was now theirs. And this went on for years and years, and this whole time you tried to make peace and you tried to stand up for yourself and protect your things, and you kept telling them that it wasn't okay. And then one day, things calmed down for a bit, and you had a chance to have lunch together, and you got along okay. Would it be fair if someone took a picture of you having lunch, and then all anyone would ever know about how you were treated was from this one picture? What about everything else that happened? You'd want people to know about that too, right? You'd also want them to know that you stood up for yourself and you protected yourself the best that you could. That one lunch doesn't tell the whole story. And then I'd ask, what do you think about that? And then I'd follow their lead and answer their questions honestly. Your conversation will have more or less language, really depending on your child's age and their development. And remember, you are beginning a conversation and a dialogue that will be ongoing. The goal shouldn't be to get all the information in and all the details of history in this one conversation. It's just too much information for kids to digest at one time. But this is one way to begin the conversation and to start to shift the narrative in a way that honors Indigenous people and that let kids know the whole story of Thanksgiving hasn't been told like it should, but you're working on changing that. And there may be points in the conversation that you don't know what to say, or your kids may ask you a question that you don't know the answer to, and that is okay. I don't know is a perfectly fine and honest answer. Just be sure that the conversation doesn't end there. So you could say, that's a great question, and I'm so glad that you asked me. I need some time to think about the best answer for you, so give me some time and then I'll get back to you. And then be sure that you do get back to them. Or you could say, that's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. Let's figure it out together. It is so important for us to talk about the history of Thanksgiving in a way that is honest. And it's not a pretty picture. It's not a pretty history, and it may not be easy to talk about. And you may stumble through it, and that is okay. It is always better to stumble through a tough conversation than to not have the conversation at all. Our kids deserve to know the truth, and they can handle it. We just have to be willing to learn the truth and be willing to share it with them.